Sofia, a 21-year-old immigrant chasing the American dream, and Harold, a 62-year-old Texas rancher craving companionship, seemed like an unlikely pair. But behind their affair was a dangerous deal, one built on secrets, lies, and desperation. What began as an arrangement for immigration would soon spiral into obsession, betrayal, and a tragedy no one saw coming. Sofia's journey to the United States was not one of luxury or ease, but of determination and sacrifice. At just 21 years old, she left behind a small town in northern Mexico, where opportunities were scarce and the future felt uncertain. She carried with her the heavy weight of her family's hopes and her own desire for a better life. Crossing the border was only the beginning. She quickly found herself in a quiet Texas town where life moved slower, and every day felt like a race against time as she sought stability and a way to secure her place in this new country. With limited English and no real connections, Sofia took a job at a local diner, where the smell of fried food clung to her clothes and the long hours left her exhausted. But even in her fatigue, she never stopped dreaming of the life she believed America could offer her. It was in that very diner that she first noticed Harold. He was older, much older, a man who looked as though life had given him wealth but taken away everything else. His face was weathered, his hands rough, and his eyes carried a loneliness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Harold owned a large ranch on the edge of town, land that had been in his family for generations. People whispered about him. Some said he was generous. Others claimed he was temperamental. What everyone agreed on was that Harold lived alone. His children were grown, and his wife had been gone for years. He came to the diner often, usually sitting at the same corner booth, staring out the window as if he were waiting for something or someone to arrive. Sofia noticed the way Harold looked at her. It wasn't just the passing glance of a customer. It was lingering, searching, almost desperate. At first she felt uneasy, but soon she realized that his attention could be useful. She knew her situation was fragile. Her visa would expire, and without a path forward, her dream could end in an instant. Harold, with his wealth and citizenship, represented stability. To him, she was youth, beauty, and companionship in the silence of his lonely home. To her, he was a lifeline, someone who could help her build the life she imagined. The first time Harold spoke to her beyond the usual order, he asked about her family, about where she came from, and about her dreams. Sofia answered cautiously, careful not to reveal too much, but enough to show him she was ambitious and hopeful. Harold seemed captivated. He began visiting more often, staying longer, and leaving tips far larger than necessary. Within weeks, he invited her to his ranch, presenting it as a chance to see more of Texas life. Sofia hesitated but agreed, sensing that this could be the opening she needed. When she stepped onto the ranch, she was struck by its vastness. The land stretched endlessly. The house stood tall but quiet, and the air carried both freedom and isolation. Harold watched her carefully, as though he had been waiting years for someone to walk those halls again. It was in that moment that Sofia realized just how much power she held. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was someone who could change Harold's life, just as he could change hers. What neither of them knew was that the path they were stepping onto together would lead them not toward happiness, but toward a dark fate that would shake the quiet town forever. Sofia's visits to the ranch became more frequent, and soon they turned into stays that lasted days at a time. Harold was eager to keep her close, offering her comfort that far exceeded the small apartment she had been renting with other young immigrants. His house was spacious, filled with fine furniture and reminders of the family that once lived there. Photographs of Harold's late wife and grown children lined the walls, their smiles frozen in time, silently observing the presence of this much younger woman moving into their father's life. For Sofia, the arrangement was both thrilling and unsettling. She enjoyed the luxury, the quiet, and the stability Harold provided, yet deep inside, she understood that her presence there was built on fragile ground. It did not take long before Harold's intentions became clear. He hinted at marriage, sometimes joking, sometimes serious, making it clear that he wanted more than just companionship. Sofia knew exactly what such a union could offer her. Marriage to a U.S. citizen meant a secure path to residency, a promise of permanence in a country where she constantly felt like an outsider. For Harold, the appeal was obvious. He had someone to share his days with, a young woman who made him feel alive again. What began as silent understanding between them soon turned into an agreement neither put into exact words but both fully recognized. He would provide, and she would stay. At first, it seemed simple enough. Sofia played her part well, offering Harold the affection he craved, while Harold showered her with gifts and promises of a future together. But the town noticed. Neighbors whispered about the couple's strange pairing, and rumors spread quickly. People said Sofia was taking advantage of Harold, that she was far too young and clearly desperate for a green card. Harold's adult children, especially his daughter, were furious. They confronted their father, questioning why he was allowing a woman barely older than their own children into his life. Their suspicions grew stronger as Sofia became more established in the house. With every protest, Harold only grew more stubborn. The conflict began to wear on Sofia as well. She felt the sharp stares in town, the unspoken judgments whenever she stepped into the grocery store or walked past Harold's neighbors. She started to realize that her dream came at a cost, one that required her to silence her own doubts and endure the growing hostility around her. More troubling was Harold's temper. Though kind and generous most of the time, he showed flashes of anger when he felt ignored or disrespected. Sofia noticed how quickly his mood could shift, how suspicion crept into his words when she stayed out longer than expected. What once felt like a lifeline was beginning to resemble a trap. Despite the tension, Sofia knew she had little choice but to continue. She told herself that all she needed was time, just enough for the marriage to be official and the immigration process to move forward. Once she had that, she imagined she could take control of her future, perhaps even leave Harold if things became unbearable. But Harold had his own vision of their life together, one where Sofia remained his companion until the end. Their unspoken deal had tied them together, but the strings were tightening with each passing day. What began as a careful arrangement was transforming into a dangerous bond, one that carried more risk than either of them could see. The first cracks in their delicate arrangement appeared quietly, almost unnoticed, until they grew impossible to ignore. Harold's once doting behavior became overshadowed by a new habit of questioning Sofia's every move. If she left the house to run errands, he asked where she had gone, who she had seen, and why it had taken so long. He began checking her phone when she wasn't looking, searching for signs of betrayal. At first, Sofia brushed it off as the paranoia of an older man, afraid of being abandoned. But his questions turned sharper, and his suspicion became harder to escape. Each time she returned home, she felt as though she was walking into an interrogation. Sofia's unease deepened when Harold's daughter hired a private investigator. The daughter was convinced that Sofia's presence had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with papers. Soon the investigator uncovered details that added fuel to the fire. Records of Sofia's life before Texas showed she had been in touch with another man back in Mexico, someone who had once spoken to her about marriage. Though the connection was distant and faded, it was enough to make Harold feel certain that she had only used him as a stepping stone. The investigator also noted her recent phone calls with an old friend, a woman she trusted with her fears. These calls revealed her growing desperation and her thoughts of leaving Harold once her immigration status was secured. The revelations hit Harold like a storm. His once steady demeanor unraveled, became more possessive, clinging to Sofia as though she might disappear at any moment. He accused her of plotting behind his back, of laughing at him with others, of treating him like a fool. Sofia felt trapped between fear and necessity. She had wanted freedom, but instead, she had walked into a life of constant surveillance and emotional volatility. She began to keep her own secrets, hiding small amounts of money, keeping a change of clothes tucked away, preparing for the possibility that she might have to flee without warning. What made the situation more dangerous was Harold's pride. For a man who had lived his life respected in his community, the idea that he could be used or humiliated was unbearable. The whispers in town, the cold glares from his children, and the growing distance in Sofia's eyes all fed into his anger. He convinced himself that she was deceiving him, and once the thought took root, nothing could shake it. Sofia, meanwhile, found herself battling guilt alongside fear. She had never intended to cause harm, but her dream of security had led her into a relationship she could no longer control. By the time autumn settled over Texas, the fragile balance in Harold's home was gone. Their days were filled with suspicion, their nights with silence broken only by sudden outbursts. Sofia wrote in her journal that she felt like a prisoner in a house that had once seemed like a palace. The tension built slowly but steadily, until every glance, every word carried the weight of unspoken threats. Both of them were spiraling toward an inevitable breaking point, though neither could yet see just how far it would go. The night that would end everything began like so many before it, with a quiet dinner at Harold's ranch. The heat of the Texas summer lingered in the air, pressing heavy against the windows while cicadas buzzed in the distance. Harold had been drinking earlier in the day, his glass of whiskey never far from reach, and his mood shifted unpredictably. Sofia could sense the storm before it struck, the way his eyes lingered on her phone, the way his voice carried suspicion, even when he tried to sound casual. She moved carefully, aware that one wrong word could ignite an argument that would last for hours. Later in the evening, when Harold finally demanded to see her phone, the tension that had been building for months erupted. He discovered messages from a friend in Mexico, words that to him confirmed betrayal. In his eyes, these were not innocent conversations, but proof of her plotting, evidence that she was preparing to leave once she no longer needed him. The rage in his voice echoed through the empty halls of the ranch house, spilling into the quiet countryside. Neighbors would later recall hearing raised voices and the crash of something breaking, though at the time, none realized the danger that was unfolding. Sofia tried to defend herself, but Harold's anger was relentless. Shouted, his face red with fury, his hands trembling as he accused her of deception and greed. The whiskey only sharpened his words, pushing him further into a spiral of rage and despair. To Harold, everything had been a lie, and the humiliation of being used was unbearable. To Sofia, the walls seemed to close in tighter with every step he took toward her. She had always feared this moment, and now it had arrived with terrifying force. The struggle that followed was chaotic. Furniture was overturned, glass shattered across the floor, and the air filled with the sound of fear and desperation. In the heat of the confrontation, Harold lost his footing. He stumbled backward, slipping against the broken glass, and struck his head with a sickening impact. The room fell silent, except for Sofia's frantic breathing. She stood frozen, staring at the motionless figure before her. In that instant, the reality of what had happened crashed over her like a wave. She had not planned this, yet the outcome was irreversible. Sofia panicked. She rushed to Harold's side, but there was no response. His body lay heavy and lifeless, the life gone from his eyes. Fear consumed her, not only of what had just happened, but of what would follow. She thought of the police, of Harold's children who already despised her, of the community that had never trusted her presence. In her mind, she was certain no one would believe her story. They would call her a manipulator, a liar, and now a killer. As the night dragged on, Sofia gathered her belongings in a daze. She left the ranch house in silence, slipping into the darkness, leaving behind shattered glass, a lifeless body, and the echoes of a deal that had turned deadly. By morning, the town would wake to whispers of tragedy, and the secret of what had happened on Harold's ranch would begin to unravel piece by piece. The days that followed Harold's death threw the small Texas town into a state of shock. News spread quickly, with whispers of betrayal, murder, and scandal filling the conversations of neighbors and strangers alike. Harold had been a respected man, a fixture of the community, and the idea that he had died violently in his own home was almost too much for people to believe. What made the story even more compelling was Sofia's sudden disappearance. She had vanished into the night, leaving behind a scene of chaos and a community desperate for answers. To many, her absence was as good as a confession. Investigators began piecing together the evidence left inside the ranch house. They found broken glass scattered across the living room floor, signs of a heated struggle, and Harold's body lying near the fireplace with a severe head injury. His blood alcohol level revealed he had been drinking heavily that night, something that aligned with the theory of an accident. Still, investigators could not ignore the mounting suspicion surrounding Sofia. Her belongings were partially packed, her phone was missing, and neighbors confirmed hearing the argument hours before Harold's body was discovered. For the police, the search for Sofia became a top priority. After nearly a week, their efforts paid off. She was discovered in a rundown motel outside town, hiding under a false name. When officers entered the room, they found her disoriented, frightened, and unwilling to speak at first. Eventually, she claimed Harold had attacked her during an argument, and that in the chaos he had fallen, striking his head. She insisted she had acted only in self-defense, that she had never meant for any of it to happen. Yet her attempt to flee cast a long shadow over her story. To many, it looked like guilt. The case moved quickly to court, fueled by the community's demand for justice. Harold's children painted Sofia as a manipulative young woman who had preyed on their father's loneliness for personal gain. They described her as a schemer who never loved Harold, who only saw him as a means to an end. They pointed to her hidden plans to marry another man and her desperate attempt to escape as proof of her calculated betrayal. On the other hand, Sofia's defense argued that she was the victim of a controlling, volatile man whose temper had spiraled out of control. They emphasized her youth, her vulnerability, and the fear she had felt living under constant suspicion. The trial left the town divided. Some saw Sofia as a cold opportunist who had exploited Harold until the relationship collapsed in violence. Others viewed her as a frightened young woman who had been cornered by circumstances far beyond her control. In the end, the verdict could not erase the shadows that lingered over the story. The tragedy of Harold's death and the destruction of Sofia's dreams became a grim reminder of what happens when desperation and loneliness intertwine. Long after the courtroom closed, the tale of the young immigrant and the old rancher remained a haunting story whispered across Texas, a cautionary tale of love, lies, and the deadly consequences of choices made in pursuit of a dream.